I've learned from the Zhuangzi that great understanding must come from breaking away of norms and a change that we take on, which can be scary at times, but possibly very liberating. Hello, my friends. My name is Spencer. I'm a maker, and I love stories. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 1 of the Zhuangzi, maybe the most famous chapter, and I'll be carving a bowl that's reminiscent of its first section. So this chapter is called Xiao Yao You. So Xiao Yao is the act of sort of being unencumbered, being free, carefree even. And Yo is travel or wandering, not necessarily with a goal at the end. So this chapter is very much focused on, in my opinion, liberation from a world that is tied down by qualifications through the introduction of paradox. Paradox is something that unsettles people, and sometimes there are paradoxes in our world that we encounter, but they are at first always very troubling, and then perhaps the only way to end up understanding certain ideas is through that. So we begin this chapter in the northern darkness, where there is a fish who is called Kun. And the Kun is so huge that it's the biggest thing there is. And then it changes. It leaps from the water and becomes this bird named the Peng. It grows wings. There's a famous phrase, Kun Peng Zhan Shi, that the Kun turns into the Peng by growing wings. And its wings span across the sky, and its wing beats are like a gale, and it flies with the wind under it for a huge distance, like sort of an incalculable distance. So we have this fish that's turning into a bird. That is a transformation right there. But that the Kun is seen as the biggest thing, and then as soon as it transforms into the Peng, and they say that's the biggest thing, which is another sort of paradox. A further paradox about this beginning, this opener, this powerful opener, is that Kun is the word for fish roe. So basically the fish egg sac that contains the yuzi, the little fish eggs, which are seen as the smallest possible thing, and yet we say this Kun is the biggest possible thing. So we have things that are big, called tiny, that are turning into even bigger things, which already is sort of unsettling. It's unsettling in that we can't fully understand it, at least on its surface, right? And so this is an immediate washing away of the tied down terminology that we use to qualify things. And so we have our first transformation. Right after that, we have a quail speaking with a cicada about the Peng, and they're sort of laughing at the Peng, saying that, it needs all this wind under it, it flies so far, and me, when I fly up to a tree, that's pretty much the highest I go, and then I fall to the ground. What's the point of trying to go that far? And then the Zhuangzi ends up talking about if you're traveling that distance that the Peng might travel, then you need to make sure you pack enough grain and grow it in advance and grind it down in advance so that you can be prepared for your journey. But that's not something that the Peng does. It just flaps its great wings and the wind follows under it, and it flies thousands of li, this old unit of measurement from the time. And the cicada and the quail talk about how inconvenient that must be. What a pity. But the Zhuangzi goes on to talk about these other things, not just the quail and the cicada, but he mentions like the morning mushroom knows nothing of nighttime. So if it just blooms in the morning, that will be what it knows, right? And the cicada itself is something that is of the summer. And so the cicada knows nothing of winter or autumn or spring. It only knows its narrow, sort of myopic lens by which it sees the world. And so the Zhuangzi talks about little understanding. He says little understanding cannot come up to great understanding. And so however much your capacity is for your knowledge, your understanding, is going to shape the world that you understand. And so if you try to open your mind wider, perhaps, then you might see a sort of liberation, a transformation, just as perhaps the kun does when he becomes the peng, when he's something that we see as very big, that we call small, and becomes something even bigger, even grander. This, I believe, though I'm not a Taoist sage, speaks to the ever-expansiveness of the human condition, that we are not simply a sliver of something that someone else perceives. So me, for example, to you perhaps, I'm just a voice and some video clips on YouTube, but to me, I am more. And to the people that I have befriended, perhaps I have a different understanding to them, a different identity. And all of those things are incomplete, right? None of the things that I've just mentioned are the entirety of me. And so too with you. That you perhaps have the power to go to transform, to get even bigger, even grander, to widen your understanding of the world. And this idea of transformation is something that it extends to all things, not simply understanding, right? As we move further in the Zhuangzi, we'll see talk of the transformation of things, right? Especially in our chapter 2, where we have the very famous dream of the butterfly, which perhaps we'll do a different carving of in the future. But transformation can be in the growth of a person, a human being, their physicality, right? A child to an adult, perhaps. In your understanding, in your change of worldview, the way you see the world can expand to include others. Your empathy can expand to become a stronger friend, a stronger partner. And even across the precipice of life and death, Zhuangzi might argue that this is simply a transformation. So on this bowl, I've decided to carve a few things. So I've carved my depiction of the peng in a sort of wispy, cloud-like style that is different than the depiction below, which is of the cicada. I ended up not going with a quail, but a different bird. And I drew those in a more sort of realistic style than the peng. And they are talking about the peng. They are sort of insulting this idea of the peng, this great bird. And from there, I've carved in Xiaozhuan, this old style script that I like to use when carving in Chinese, especially in more classical stuff. And I've carved the words 北冥有鱼. So in the northern darkness, there is a fish, 其名为鲲, and its name is called by the name Kun. And so notice the Kun does not appear on this bowl at all, but he has already become the Peng. And so I wanted to introduce those sort of two levels of paradox in this particular piece, where I have the Kun mentioned, but the Peng shown, and then the Peng and the bird and cicada done in two different styles. And I hope that came through. But I very much enjoyed this carving, and certainly very much enjoyed talking about Xiao Yao Yo, this free and easy wandering chapter, of which there is more to tell. It's a longer chapter, considering the Zhuangzi, most of the chapters are a bit shorter. But I hope this has been fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. And have a wonderful day.